Hello and welcome back to Homescreen, the show brought to you by 11FS Pulse, a platform with over 5,000 user journeys from banks and fintechs from all over the world. So head over to pulse.11fs.com to check it out. As you can see today, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ali MacManus and Will Jones. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a long time since we've been here.
It's been a long time.
Been waiting by the phone.
Yeah, but it's since the 100th episode, it's been great to have you guys back. So today we're going to talk about Buy Now, Pay Later. Obviously a huge topic right now and has been really for the last 2 years. But before we do, let's just do a little bit of background. Whilst the concept of buying things and paying for them later dates back to the 19th century, the rise of Buy Now, Pay Later products such as Klarna and ClearPay has led to a retail revolution, changing the way many of us shop. Managed correctly, Buy Now, Pay Later can be a cheap and quick way of accessing credit at the point of purchase, with far fewer barriers to entry than a credit card. Hence, the popularity of the payment method has skyrocketed. A recent report has shown that Buy Now, Pay Later payments are expected to account for nearly a quarter of all global e-commerce transactions by 2026. Meanwhile, with the rise of virtual Buy Now, Pay Later cards, its brick-and-mortar presence is rapidly growing as well. However, with such easy access, very little regulation, and a young cohort of users, the service has received increased scrutiny as it facilitates impulse buying and irresponsible debt. What's clear though is that this payment method is becoming globally mainstream. So today, we're exploring what to get right when designing Buy Now, Pay Later.
Well, I think what we wanted to do today was call out some of the, design approaches to creating a good Buy Now, Pay Later experience. The first thing to recognise is your role as a Buy Now, Pay Later provider actually within the basket scenario, which is, let's be honest, where the majority of people, especially for a new Buy Now, Pay Later product, are going to discover that product.
Yeah.
And it's your role versus the role of the merchant. The merchant obviously has, they've got the reach, they've got the shopping experience. They are the branded environment that you are in. You're not within their platform. So your role as a Buy Now, Pay Later provider is to understand that you are within that basket context more often than not. Not only do you need to feel credible through the way that you present yourselves alongside other payment methods, but you do need to feel differentiated. There are so many now, and it's not a race for who can be the least blue or the least like a Visa, MasterCard, whatever the standard ones are. But it's more about presenting your proposition in what is often a tiny little button.
Yeah.
Obviously, we see a lot of opportunity for Buy Now, Pay Later brands to start to provide their own widgets, but in the first instance, the user is needing to understand your propositions within that space. So I think that's really important to understand. The other thing to understand is because you're not in an owned environment, the handoff to your interface is super, super important.
Right.
I mean, we know that a really good checkout flow removes a lot of the website or app Chrome that is there to allow you to click off and not buy the thing and abandon your basket. So that is the first thing to recognize. If you're on a merchant's platform, the chances are they've done that anyway. So actually, the main UI that someone is seeing when they're then asked to put in their details for you or handed the details for you needs to, in a great experience, feel fairly seamless but clear. The reassurance coming from the payments brand. So the reassurance of what you're buying from the merchant, consistent UI, and the reassurance that this payment is secure from the Buy Now, Pay Later person themselves.
Okay, great. Should we have a quick look at that then? Ali, well known to be not the biggest fan of buy now, pay later, quite outspoken in that regard. How do we address that from a design point of view?
I think that seamlessness didn't have enough friction for what is essentially sort of a small term loan, which often, as Will said before as well, they're often not presented as such. So therefore, I guess if we were to tease this out as a bit of a principle, it's about that sort of transparency in exactly what the product is and what the next steps entail. It's not as important, and all the seamless stuff can come a little bit later when people are returning customers. But that first time, I think people really need to understand exactly what it is they're getting into and the steps that it entails.
Right.
If we're thinking about that principle of transparency of what happens next, don't put it in the terms and conditions. That's what people expect from a loan. That's what people expect not to read. And that is kind of, if you don't have that stuff up front, what makes people a little bit more mistrustful of brands that they don't recognise as well. So you can bring these things to life with real clarity about when you have to make repayments. And you can also focus it all around owning the item and put a lovely warm glow around it rather than the debt aspect of it, which I know Ali will hate because he hates buy now, pay later, and that is plays into the evils of it. But I think for a buy now, pay later provider, it is about that balance of, isn't this great, you can afford this item, but be aware of these things, but aren't they easy?
Okay,
it's those things.
It can be easy just as long as it's transparent.
That's it.
Exactly. As Will said, it doesn't need to be a graph, and I think we can have a little look at how it could appear now.
Yeah. So we found out what happens at the point of sale, which is great. What happens after that?
I think there's a much of a duty of aftercare, and as Will said earlier about that handoff of the relationship. You now have that relationship. Their relationship with the merchant and the commerce store that they had has gone. It's finished. You are now in their care. So making sure that they always know, like, when they've got payments to make or what the ongoing effects are. I think we've seen a few bank accounts introducing sort of buy now, pay later products for previous things. So we look at Monzo Flex.
Right.
They have, they're very good at being able to tell you exactly when those payments are coming out, exactly what that looks like, and they understand that people respond very well to visual aids and cues, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you look at traditional, I guess, product financing where you'd buy something in a shop and they go, would you like to put this on a loan or whatever product the product is dressed up as? There's a lot of paper involved in that. We're not in that world anymore. We're not in that world where you can just digitize statements and then come along and go, this is where you're at this month, this is what happens next. It's effectively a set of forecasted transactions. We're used to being able to see a little bit into the future now with our bank accounts. And it's just a very similar thing. It should feel incredibly frictionless, like you don't have to do anything, but you should feel like you know at all times. And we've also seen that as an opportunity for buy now, pay later brands to remove some of the other frictions that happen afterwards as well, because they can go and give you the opportunity to skip a payment or something like that, and just understand that it's important for the customer to feel that not just they've taken this innovative product that's given them something they couldn't have, but the brand is on side. If something goes wrong, they're far more likely to then use this brand the next time at checkout.
Yeah.
I'm coming across as someone that's on the side of the brands here, where I think naturally, as someone that doesn't like BNPL, Ali's coming across on the side of the customer, but I'm happy to don that hat.
You're a
for
fan,
this.
and that's fine. Do you think this is where the buy now, pay later products have the opportunity to kind of take an advantage that over the credit cards? Because a lot of them do have slightly hidden fees, or you're not quite sure when you're meant to pay it back or what the consequences are.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting ones will be these sort of more embedded into bank accounts, the buy now, pay later options, the ability to extend the life on a payment, and then what that sort of aftercare looks like, and how then that integrates with, things like committed spend, budgeting for future months. Are these things woven in? Can people manage their debt and their spending at once in one place? I think there's a really big potential in there to make this a lot more seamless, and maybe even people to have less providers for their credit and debit products.
Yeah,
Great.
I think another point of differentiation is how these things are presented, and the term of the loans as well. The fact that when you take these things out, it just feels like a slightly longer purchase, rather than if you sign up to a credit card, you're effectively going, I'm cool with taking on loads of debt whenever I want. And there's this sense of danger in people's minds. You know, they hear about debt crisis in America, and they hear about people they know that have 20 grand of credit card debt, and they think, well, that could easily be me because I like buying loads of stuff. Whereas this is going, well, I just can't afford that right now, but this is just effectively a 3-month payment process, but it has a finite end to it. And I think that is the genius of how this has been branded, but that has to come through in the way it's described at point of sale and whenever you repeat the purchase with the same provider.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a look at how best to execute that kind of understanding your position. So what we've got here is essentially a B2B to C product. Design-wise, do you think that's the best order of prioritization?
For me, I think things should always be customer first. I think without those customers buying things from these merchant stores and on e-commerce, then you basically don't have a business in order to run. I think we've touched on the 3 really good principles so far for being like really good for being customer understanding. So ease of use, understanding your position and the context within the environment. But there's definitely wins to be had in sort of the B2B element before you get to the customers too. I just always would place emphasis on that customer segment.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. If we're teasing out a principle around designing for customer first, I think always that makes total sense. So designing CBB, perfect. But for and this is me donning the hat of brand manager for BNPL company again. As a BNPL brand, the win to really have is to satisfy the middle B, the merchant whose platform you want to be hosted on. Because otherwise a customer's never going to discover you, and you're not going to get any repeat business because that one store you provided, maybe they didn't go back to. Like, that is to say that making something where you've removed friction from that middle B, that merchant, is exactly how to win as a BNPL brand. We saw, it's well documented that I guess Klarna did that for fashion or clothing industry, and the friction points for the merchant around people trying things on at home, people sending things back, issuing refunds, etc., it's completely gone. So if you are a big financial services brand, or a BNPL startup or whatever, the smartest thing I would do is focus on a specific industry, and apply the same model. For example, you could say, I don't know, air travel. And I know I've seen a few brands that have started to do this where the friction points around that are completely different. Buying tickets, you're normally, let's say you're buying for a group. The group buyer is completely out of pocket at that point. How can the BNPL brand allow the customer not to be quite as out of pocket, allow the merchant to put through a bigger ticket order? Because if they're booking a group booking but they know everyone's going to pay them later, everyone's flight's getting bought. Even Dave and Pete and Jill, who are going to drop out at later points, they've still bought them all up front. Like, I know that's a rambling example, but you take it to another industry, you remove points of friction for customer, and more importantly, to get into the basket, the merchant. The other way of removing friction is giving a better checkout experience than they already have, and therefore you are then replacing more of that checkout flow. And I think that's where we've really seen BNPL come to life, and that's the same, I guess, with any payment service.
You really feel that with that consistent checkout method they use it a few times, it's already pretty seamless, as we've touched upon. They don't have to deal with this new checkout from a new merchant. It's always the same, and maybe that encourages more spending, but it's certainly beneficial for the buy now pay later companies.
A big part of design is how your brand is felt through an experience. I think we've talked a lot around the dominance of certain brands when you're on an owned platform, when not, how the way that you dress things up can give people a completely different idea of the type of debt they're getting into. I think one thing I'd call out as a must is branding your payment terms or your payment types. So if you're effectively offering people buy now, pay later solution, don't call it buy now, pay later, call it like pay in 3 or something where they go, that sounds easy, that is ownable, and you're communicating a hell of a lot of information in that space.
Even the product name, then you're explaining exactly what it is.
Exactly that, yeah. And it comes back to the whole arbitrarily giving a branded term to something that is quite dull, which we know Apple for, in terms of Gorilla Glass and whatever else you want to throw as a stupid principle to it. But it works, and there's no difference to here. Rather than saying a complicated thing of going, pay in 6 months, pay in 3 months, stagger this, blah, 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 pause this, brand up all of those things. Now, I'm not going to think of names for these things on the spot, but a lot of different brands have, which we can have a look at. But it's a huge part of this, because not only can it communicate a lot, feel like a different type of debt, it's also really recognisable next time you come in to the experience. I love those examples, but as the man in the room with the greatest knowledge of brands through your work on Pulse, are there any others that people watching should be aware of or to really check out?
Yeah, there's so many good ones, actually. I think so much money's been poured into it in quite tight spaces of design. QuadPay, we mentioned before, their previous desktop experience, which is on Pulse actually, is very, very good. Really kind of clean way of doing it, and incorporates a lot of those design principles that you guys mentioned. Hum is also a very good one. Bundle. And Atome. So yeah, the competition is pretty stiff there.
You're a big fan of Zip, aren't you?
Huge fan of Zip. Yeah, I think just when we were talking about how they appear as sort of like a brand across all the different sort of components, the touch points that they have made use of sort of their brand assets and their visual language, even in the most unbranded of spaces, like we were talking about, in the merchant's checkout where they don't own the platform and things. They're still really recognisable based on what they've put out there in the market about themselves. Yeah. And that familiarity, when you then hit into their platforms, their marketplace, their things, those sort of lovely touches and visual bits that aren't intrusive are there. They're recognisable. So that handover bit's been taken care of.
Yeah. Good point. And we obviously touched on a few just in those examples we showed earlier, all kind of executing those principles well. Okay, great. Well, that's been a very interesting discussion. So if you want to see more of those journeys, please head over to pulse.11fs.com. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
No worries at all. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Cheers.